Welcome to FAR-View, the podcast of the Foundation for Auditing Research.
Great that you are all here. And one of the big things that we want to have is, of course, we want to do research, but more importantly, we want to communicate with you, what these findings of this research are. And we have international faculty that actually conduct this research. And today we are very glad to have one of those researchers, Joe Brazel, who's going to give a presentation today on something that is all important to us. How do we make sure that people in our teams are skeptical? And skeptical means sufficiently skeptical, not too much skeptical. And and Joe is going to introduce us with questions like, when is actually the supervisor happy with the level of skepticism that is brought to the table, right? Never good enough. Maybe sometimes too much. Maybe sometimes wrong, right? So it's important that we discuss these issues, and we're also going to look at one level up. How can audit committees actually affect this level? So I'm actually very curious about this. So without further ado, the word is to you, Joe.
Well, thank you very much. And before I start, I just want to thank you all for being here, having this opportunity. Obviously, the FAR has been incredibly supportive of my research and my co-authors. And I really enjoy conveying my research to practice. One of the reasons I've stayed at North Carolina State my entire career is we're a big impact school. We always say it doesn't end with the academic journal that so many academics read, but not people in the real world. So I love presenting my research in a user-friendly format to groups like this. I also write for Forbes, where I convey other people's research that's very interesting but very hard to read to people in the real world. So, and they're typically in the audit, fraud, corporate reporting framework. So let's talk a little bit about skepticism. I'm going to be presenting two research studies. The first one we published a little while back, but had a pretty big impact. And then one that's still what we call a working paper, so it's to be continued. The nice part about these research studies is they're in the same family. They do look at the same things, they look at the same fraud red flag. They both sort of center on incentives, rewards, evaluations, support from the audit committee. So it's pretty easy to go from study one to study two. This is just a simple model, and it'll be my worst slide of the afternoon because I didn't make it. It's from another gentleman, but as academics, we try to make things as something as difficult as skepticism, trying to encapsulate it into a simple world where we look at evidence. A lot of evidence is consistent with the client's reporting, and sometimes there's anomalies, exceptions, fraud red flags. And when they come about, we try to figure out how auditors make their first skeptical judgment, which we call a sniff test. Does it seem right? Do I identify it? And then more importantly, and the focus of my studies are, what do you do? Do you convey it to your audit manager? Do you question management about it in inquiry? And then obviously after further digging, incurring costs, which are a big part of skepticism, there's an outcome. You either find a misstatement or you don't, and as we all know, the vast majority of times we don't find something. And just with respect to the drivers of this, we're really going to focus on this incentive piece, because I think incentives drive the world. So the first paper has a very academic title. Think of outcome effects as hindsight bias. In other words, I know what happened at the very end of the story, or your skepticism. I know you either found a misstatement or you didn't, and now I'm going to judge how your decision-making process before that, knowing the outcome. So, they say hindsight is 20/20. We're all real smart when we know the outcome. The problem is the auditor in the field obviously just follows the evidential trail. They don't know if there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So just obviously this room knows all as much as more than I do about skepticism, but there's the nice definition that I think is phenomenal because I can actually remember it. It's a big part of what we do. With respect to fraud, we want to make sure, even though we've had positive experiences with our clients in the past, things can change. And the thought is, if I am more skeptical, I'm more likely to find red flags and look into them. But again, We'll talk more about it later, but it ain't free. You know, if skepticism was free, we wouldn't have an insufficiency problem. So obviously in the US and in other places, we found that, you know, bad audits, the root cause is often a lack of skepticism. And I've done obviously a lot of international research, and people are people. There's a few differences between what we see in America and in other places. The good news is your people are more skeptical than I run a U.S. study. It says three things really drive your skepticism. One, you have to know where you are. You have to be smart to ask questions. You need to know your industry, where things are going. So you need to be smart to be skeptical. There's also been a lot of research on this trait skepticism, our natural inclination to ask questions or be bold enough to ask questions of corporate managers that are the age of your parents and when you're a youngster. Your need for proof, and other factors. And we'll get back to that in a little bit, but we're really going to concentrate on incentives and the reward process. So we're going to say it's not as much about the auditor in the field who's doing all the testing, but their evaluator, their audit manager, or their audit senior, who was ever evaluating their work, they may play a large role. And then secondly, if their evaluator plays a large role, do those effects roll downhill? So when exercising skepticism, obviously the benefits are known. You're more likely to identify material misstatements, nothing there, but it's not free. You could go over budget, you could upset management, you could delay other testing, you name it. And when you exercise skepticism, sometimes you do find that material misstatement and you'll get a nice golf clap from your supervisor, but more often than not, a negative outcome may be a little bit of a strong word, but it's not a wonderful outcome that you dig and dig and dig, you incur additional costs, and then you determine that there's no material misstatement. There's a reasonable explanation. The big question is, if there are two major outcomes, if the skepticism is appropriate, and that's key. I'm not talking about digging when you shouldn't dig, but when there are red flags that need to be investigated and you either find something or don't find something, is my evaluation more affected by the outcome of my work or by my skeptical process? And these are our main results, that when Sam finds something, no matter how he consults with his manager, he's evaluated higher. We all would expect that. But when he doesn't, even though it's the same process, same evidence, same fraud red flag, we see this substantial reduction in his evaluation. And then keeping in mind, this is in the met expectations world, this is in the above expectations world. So we see a significant decline in Sam's evaluation just because something he could not control. Now you say, well, what happens when he consulted with his manager? Shouldn't that have eliminated this? It brings the evaluation up, but not enough. And the other thing, and one thing I tell the kids in my classes are, the best way you can consult is in a keeping them in the loop type of consultation, because as you can see, when Sam badgers his audit manager about this, that, and the other thing, and the audit manager probably thinks, well, if I'm going to do this work, I might as well do it. Be an independent thinker. So we see Sam's evaluation go down. These results are sort of mixed as far as statistical significance, but one of the key things I tell my kids is when you consult, don't go overboard, but do consult. All right, so we know that there's this outcome effect. What if we turn the dial, flip the switch, and just reward staff when they're appropriately skeptical regardless of outcomes? So we ran a study a couple of years ago. This again is in the US, where we manipulated whether during early in the year you were rewarded for being skeptical even though there was not a material misstatement. Your boss said on the engagement team, I appreciate your work. It was something we need to look into. There wasn't a misstatement, and they gave them an exceeding evaluation. So a very similar setting to what we just discussed, except for this time you are Sam. So what happens if you've been rewarded in the past? We got one of the weirdest results I've ever had in 21 years of academics. The people that were rewarded at interim earlier in the year, when we actually had them do that analytical procedure with the red flag, again, this is a separate set of participants, those that were rewarded got a quit while you are ahead perception in their head. I've got my tattoo, I'm skeptical, I'm out, I'm stopping. And we actually saw the people that were rewarded were less skeptical than the people who were not rewarded. So whenever you find something like that, first of all, they're going to tell you to replicate it because they're like, that could just be squirrely. You got a bunch of weirdos on that Friday afternoon to do your study. We replicate it, and then we got to find what's going on here. And so we ran many, many other studies. This study has like 8 experiments. It's crazy. It cost me a lot of stress. It's consistency. So essentially, if you're known as a manager or a partner or a senior who consistently rewards it, backs people up, knows that it's a multiple game, that's when you see the effects of rewards going. So you got to create a track record. With that, if you're just a one-shot deal, so maybe that first time you switch over, you might want to let them know, hey, this isn't the only time I'll be supportive of you. So the consistency was very important. This is a working paper, which means it's yet to be published. This will find a nice home because it is capturing an interesting topic, looking at how the audit committee can support the engagement team to improve skepticism. Luckily, again, we've been over a lot of this stuff. Skepticism isn't free. There's a laundry list of costs that you could do. And if you think about the audit committee standing in between the audit engagement team and management, they can do a good job of insulating the audit team if they so choose. So they can allow additional fees if there's additional testing done, back up the auditor when there's disagreements with management, push management to follow through quickly with evidence requests. That was a big thing that came out in this study. Allowing them to deploy data analytics, which are initially difficult to calibrate and getting the false positives low. Just that pat on the back, I'm the true client, all that fun stuff. But we don't know how any of this support, when it occurs, how it happens. So it's what we call black box in academia. And the thing we link it to in this study is when you think about SAM, the staff, the seniors, who are, obviously it's important that they appropriately apply skepticism to identify material misstatements. They have very few interactions with, obviously, audit committees. That's not. So we asked, hey, when they do support you, how do they do it? So we have a top 5 list. One of them is, the first 2 are very soft, just being open to the engagement team, being willing to meet and talk. The next one is, as I mentioned earlier, moving management along with cooperating with evidence requests. I have nightmares of weeks and weeks asking for things and never getting it back. Just showing appreciation for the audit team. Just saying, hey, I appreciate the hard work you do. And then the last 2 are challenging management in front of the auditor and vice versa. Challenging the auditor in front of management. Pushing them to do better. Then we said, hey, when they are supportive, do they impact your skepticism? And about half said, nope, not really. And maybe that's that maintain thing, I don't know. And then the ones that did say it would impact it said it's really when we start digging in our substantive testing to find material misstatements. So not during risk assessment, but more about when we actually go test. So then we ran an experiment and we said, if audit committee support is conveyed to the entire engagement team, if the little people know about it, that are out there doing the testing, will they be more skeptical? And importantly, when it ain't free. When management has a bad attitude, rolling their eyes, they don't like you, the staff are not really happy. So our first conjecture or expectation was that, yeah, sure, they're going to be less skeptical when management has a bad attitude, but we think if we infuse them with notions of audit committee support, they'll be more likely to be skeptical in light of those costs. And then the next question is, does the messenger matter? And this goes back to the idea where there is a potential situation where an audit committee member could actually come in and you get to see Bigfoot. So in the study, we sort of go down to, if you hear from the horse's mouth, it's probably the best way to hear it. So we think that, yeah, the committee support will improve their skepticism when management doesn't like them, but it's going to do the best when they actually hear it straight from the audit committee member versus their audit partner. So the first one is support, no support. And then the second one is who you're hearing it from. And real quickly, we see a substantial increase in skepticism from the control condition to when the support is expressed. And while we saw it in the directional direction that we expected, this is really not, the data, the statistics are not statistically significant. So while we saw a situation where when the audit committee chairs, we almost had 100% skepticism, it really didn't work a whole lot better than when the audit partner does. And I'll circle back to that in a second. I mentioned earlier that we find the Dutch folks to be a lot more skeptical than the US. I've never run this in the US where the percentages were above 55%. So that's good. Someone's educating somebody. Well, thank you guys very much. It was a great audience. You guys were awesome, and I appreciate it. And like I said, and if there's anything you need, just send me an email. I'm at NC State University, not hard to find. I have a weird last name, so there's not many of us. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.